Hello friends, welcome to Squared Plans. I'm Stephanie and today we're going to do a quick overview of how to print printables from my Etsy shop. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples that you might get from my shop and how you would want to go about printing them. I'll try to keep this brief. I started to make this a while ago and it just got super long, and so I'll try to make it much more succinct because nobody wants to sit through a long video just trying to explain how to print something. So if that sounds good, let's jump in. So the first thing I have here is an actual printable from my shop. It is the half letter size and we'll be using this as the sample. I have some crop marks on this version of the printable, but many of my printables that are either the A5 or the half letter size will include a non-cropped marked version, which I'll explain why in a minute. So this is the layout here, and let's go ahead and flip down to the last page, which will have the printing instructions. So here are the instructions that I include with my printables. This one explains a little bit about each particular size, so the instructions will look different depending on the size layout you've decided on. This one here, like I said, explains that it is at page size. So the design of the file is at page size and includes the crop marks. There's a little bit of extra space where the crop marks are so that the file can be printed with the crop marks, and when you cut it, the crop marks will come off. But it is at size. So this should not fill the entire sheet of paper that you're using for printing if it's a standard letter size or A4 paper. One thing I want to note is that Acrobat Reader is strongly recommended because you have the best control with Acrobat Reader. Some of them can get away with just like the default PDF program that comes with your computers. Like you can usually print the letter size or the Happy Planner big pages without any problem just using a default program, but anything that's going to have to be shrunk or modified in some way in order to print on the page, and that's pretty much all the other sizes you really want to be using Acrobat Reader for. And it's free. You can just download it here, and it's really just the best software to give you the most control over printing. So the first thing you want to do is select print from your PDF viewing application. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Go ahead and select print. That is the little print icon here, but I think there's also a print option in the drop down at the top. So if you just want to print this size page onto a standard, let's say it's a half letter page, so let's say we want to print it on a standard letter size page, 1 up, which means 1 page per side of the paper. So you'll want to go into first page setup and just make sure everything's looking okay. I have it set up for my printer here, so I'm just going to select that. That usually helps define how far in the margin goes along the edges of this area. As you'll see, there will be an adjustment, and then you want to check the orientation. I think I'm going to want this orientation to be up and down like this because it's going to shrink in the page if I don't do that. So to print just 1 page up, you probably want it to be in portrait orientation, which is this version right here. And then for this example, we will keep the scale at 100, but we'll talk about scale in a minute as well. Okay, so this one is putting it in, but I currently have it set to booklet. So it just defaulted to booklet. I think the last thing I printed on here was a booklet size. So we're going to go to where it should look, or should be, which is under the basic size button. So most of you will have that come up as the default, and you really don't have to worry about pages to print here unless you don't want to print the first and last page, which some people don't, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But for the most part, you can keep that as is, and then here we want to do actual size below this button size here. So this is very important. Actual size will prevent the page from filling the page all the way. So here's an example of when the page will expand to fill the paper to the limits of the page. That's when you hit fit. We don't want that. So if your selection is for fit, that's probably going to cause a problem if you're trying to print like classic size. It's really obvious when you try to print half letter or mini, but Classic size is really close to letter, and so sometimes people get confused with what they're seeing on their screen versus actual when they cut it down. They're like, it doesn't fit, and that's the reason. So there's that. There is, custom scale, shrink oversized pages. This is like things you don't really have to worry about. You just want to make sure that actual size is selected in the window. That's very important. When you have that, it'll be at the size of the page, which is built to size, and should give you the proper measurements within the paper that you're going to be printing. So the next thing you want to be checking for is the orientation. Now the orientation should be set to auto. If it's not set to auto, some of the things that may occur are as follows. If you have it on portrait, you can see that yes, it's still in the right orientation, but it aligns it to the top left corner. You don't want that when you're trying to do a back-to-back, because then the back side will be also aligned at the top left corner, which would be the right left corner on this side, and they won't line up when you try to cut it down. And then of course, landscape, it'll try to shrink it into the page size in the landscape version, which is, the widest side on the top. So you don't want that either. So just make sure that the orientation is on auto, and you should be good to go there. We clicked on page setup earlier. That was one of the first things you want to check. And again, that just helps define where your margins are going to go here, this like gray outline, depending on the limits of your own printer. The next thing you want to do here is usually click into your printer settings. So this will look different depending on the type of printer that you have and what kind of, abilities that printer may have, whether it can do double-sided, whether it can print in color or black and white, all that good stuff. I have a shortcut here for black and white double-sided for my own printer, and for some reason it is giving me the wrong orientation. So this is a good example of how to troubleshoot. If you see something that doesn't look right, go ahead and back it up and go, okay, we're going to cancel. We're going to go back to page setup. And I see I had the wrong orientation selected here under page setup. So we definitely want it to be portrait. I think it probably selected this one when I was clicking through some of those other buttons. So you just want to double check and make sure that orientation is for sure up for portrait. So now when I go back into my printer settings, that looks right. See, the page sample is upright. And then we will click again on black and white double-sided, and you can see its orientation is right too. It's putting the spine on the long edge. Your printer may have a different way of saying this, but basically you're looking for, if you're doing double-sided, long edge binding. A short edge binding you may need to do if you are going to be printing 2 up, but for the majority of you, it'll be long edge binding on the very first run. And then, again, it will depend on what settings you have, if you have the option to do color or whatever, but you'll need to just double check here, make sure that all the settings are accurate for your own printer, how you want it to be printed, what paper you want it to pull, all that good stuff. So when you click print, it just kind of closes out the window and saves your settings. And as you can see, the page still looks good for the sample that we'll be printing. And that's pretty much it. I would be safe now to hit the print button, and this should line up perfectly back to back. And I could do double-sided, so it'll just print all of the pages 1 through 6 back to back. The pages are designed with the spine in mind, so there are left and right-sided pages with a little bit of extra room on the inside spine for hole punching or whatever you're going to do with the binding. Okay, so that's the first kind of a basic print option. You want to have Acrobat Reader in summary. You want to make sure that you're using the size button here, actual size, flip along the long side of the page if you're doing double-sided. Orientation, we want it to be automatic. And then you'll want to go into your page setup, just verify that it is in the right orientation there as well, and the right paper size for what you're going to be printing on in your printer. And then any other settings that you need to assign here in your print window, depending on your printer. And that's it for printing most of the printables you'll get from my shop. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and close this guy and open up another version of the same file but without crop marks. So like I said, many of the A5 and the half letter sizes in my shop come without crop marks. And the only ones that I will say I think I need to backfill in are the undated versions of those planners, but all of the dated stuff should have both versions of the file. And you can always request it if you buy a file and you need the non-cropped version. You can always, reach out to me on Etsy and I can get that to you, free of charge. So anyway, here's the non-cropped marked version of that same file, and we're going to go to the instructions here, talking about how to print 2 pages per side on a letter sheet. Okay, so the basic instructions that I went through earlier are all found here in the white section. If you want to print for the 2 pages, you want to kind of include this step 3 and 4 in your setup. So again, we need to start off with the file without crop marks to begin, and then we will go to print. So when you open it up and it's this size, again, you'll want to make sure that your page setup is correct with your printer, just to make sure you got the right paper size. And okay for now. And then you're going to jump into the booklet button here. And first thing you want to make sure is that both sides is selected. So that just means that it will print both the top of the page and the bottom of the page. And I say that because if you don't have a way to print the pages in a duplex format, which means double-sided, then you might want to have to print the front pages first and then print the backs after. But if you do have the option to do double-sided printing, make sure you have both sides selected. So we have our binding on the left, which is actually accurate even though it doesn't seem like it should be, because it will be on the left, meaning the left would be the widest page side, even though you're seeing 2 pages per. Let's see, so we've got the orientation. We have portrait versus landscape. We want to leave it at portrait, and that is basically it. You'll want to go into your printer, and again, just make sure everything else looks the same, the way you want it. And then that's it. And then this should print just fine. And like I said, you can always see a sample in Acrobat Reader before you print in case you're worried things aren't printing the way you want, which is why, again, I really highly recommend this program for printing printables of any sort. Just really gives you a lot more clarity on what is happening and how to make adjustments to get the prints that you want. So this one here, like I said, will show you exactly how it's going to print. And you can see that the page order looks a little bit weird. When you print booklet, it basically prints it like a book so that you could fold the pages in half. So you just got to keep that in mind. So when you cut, you'll cut it down the seam, but then you're going to have to be careful when you make the cuts that you don't mix up the pages. A couple of pages isn't a big deal, but if you're printing the full 100 and something odd page planner from my shop, you might want to just keep that in mind, that you want to be very diligent about how you're printing out the full planner and not to mix up the pages, because it could get confusing. But it should back it up properly as you go through. Okay, so that's how it is, and you would hit print, like I said, and then you should get a perfect bookleted print that you can easily just cut down the middle and should booklet up perfectly. Let's talk about printing the resizable printables from my shop. So this is another kind of area where sometimes I think there needs to be a little bit more clarification. I want to explain how this really works. Each of the pages in my shop is at letter size. So when you work off of that and you shrink it down, the proportions will depend on the page that you're trying to proportion it down to. So for classic, 82 is the recommended scale size to make sure that everything fits within the borders of the paper. I usually push this to 85 or 84 depending on the print, just because, you know, I want to get as big as I can on the page, and that will usually eliminate any margins or anything on the edges. But 82 will ensure that the entire page can be seen when you shrink it down. I've included quite a bit of margin on most of these resizable printables, so that way if you are doing a certain page size, you might want to tweak the scaling a little bit if you can get away with a little bit less margin on certain sides and others. But the recommended ones are to be sure that you're going to see everything you need to see from that printable when you print it down, and then cut it. Also too, there are no crop marks on this, so you're going to have to do it by measurement once you size it down. And that's just because it's a one file for all, so I can't put crop marks on one or else they'll show on another, that kind of thing. Okay, so this is the inbox file, and there are multiple pages in here. This is just the lead page. So we're going to go ahead and jump into printing with this. Let's go ahead and jump to size and make sure the actual size is selected. We're also going to just double check and make sure that auto is selected. And we're going to go into the page setup to make sure the margins are cleaned up. Again, select your printer. So you can do the scaling here, like I mentioned before. So let's say we want to scale this down for classic. Like I said, the recommended is 82%, but I sometimes push it to 84 or 85, but we'll do it 82 for now, just so you know that that will for sure work. So there, I went ahead and did it, and you can see how it shrunk in the actual page size a little bit. I believe you can do the same thing here, so let's just go ahead and try it out. So if you do custom scale, let's go back to page size and set that also back to 100. Oops. So if we do custom scale here, it does the same thing. So on my version, I have the option to do the custom scaling right here, or you can do it in the page setup. But it's either or, not both. Okay? And then everything else is the same. You just want to make sure that you are going to check your print settings in your print window and make sure that, you know, if you're doing double-sided, that it's long edge binding, that kind of thing. But otherwise, you should be good to go, and this will print at the size you want. Just something to note about the custom scale. Let's see, let's cancel. I have some suggested sizes here, again, to make sure that everything will fit within your printed page size. However, some things to note about the actual size of the page. As you know, like if you were going to print a A4 size of this standard letter size, it's going to be a lot more narrow than the letter size. And the same with the like half letter. It's not going to be a perfect proportion to this. So there may be what seems like extra space on the top, in the bottom, or in the sides, depending on the proportions of the page. It will fit, but just keep that in mind because this is all built out at letter size paper, that the page may have some extra room at the top or the bottom when you actually measure the cut to do each page. It's just a factor of the letter size of the page. It's just you can't get the right proportions for every single sheet, but you can get close, and it gives you the ability to do it without having to find a different printable. And so that's really it as far as the main issues people come across when they're trying to print one of my printables. Hope you guys found this information helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up down below, Also, to go ahead and leave me a comment if you'd like to get in touch or have any other questions for me that you'd like to see answered. And think about subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, if you'd like to see more of my videos. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and we will see you next time. Bye!